you all for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Rojas. I'm the 2030 District Director, and I'm joined by Tom Schultz, our data analyst. Today this 50% solution series is really about trying to find the solutions for our members, and that is changing in the current environment with COVID, and we're going to look at today a little bit about how that affects our buildings, whether they're operating now, whether they will be operating at full capacity soon, or if they're in low gear, what does that all look like? And so we're bringing together our panelists from different fields to have this virtual roundtable. So today, I really hope that your takeaways, that you take the opportunity to ask the experts in these fields to examine what you can do in your building. So we want to make sure that all of your questions get in. With that, I'd like, please feel free to show yourself on your camera. We'd welcome that. If you could please mute yourself if you are not speaking, we would appreciate that. This series is free and open to the public right now. And as such, we want to make sure that we're providing the services to our community so that you guys can really engage with each other and learn from people like our panelists today. With that said, we thrive on donations. So if you can, please go to Green Umbrella's website and click on the donate button, and then you can even specify that those dollars go to the 2030 district if this is something that you value. So with that, our conversation today is going to be really looking at it from a variety of viewpoints. So we have Jenna Rowe, our Global Sustainability Manager with JLL, and Cindy Hill, who's the Regional Operations Director with JLL. And we have Tim Hurdle, he's a lead engineer with Graphic. They're a data mining service, and they are a professional partner. Daniel Lessing is with BHDP. He's a client leader, and they are also a professional partner. I should mention that JLL is a member, so they're actually going to be working towards the same goals that you all are working towards. So with that, I'll also give a special thank you to the Ohio Center for Industrial Energy Efficiency. Thank you very much. They are sponsoring this event today. I guess what I'd like to just start the conversation off, we appreciate that everybody took the time to fill in when you registered, what sort of topics you want to cover. And so top of mind, it seems, with most people right now is, what does sustainability look like in our reimagined workplace? So I think I'll direct this, we'll have a question here for, we'll start it off with Jenna. Could you talk a little bit about what organizations are doing and considering in remote working practices?
Sure. There's a lot of area to cover, obviously, Elizabeth, but the biggest thing is still focusing on health and well-being for employees, making sure that we are, as companies, right, offering all of our remote workers everything that they need to be successful. But a lot of it really ties back to communication and change management, Elizabeth, because it's not just, it's not just the impact of working from home. It's also addressing everyone's concerns about re-entering the building, about, what's going to change, what don't I know? And so really, I think the biggest aspect is helping our clients from JLL's perspective talk to employees and building occupants, right, and maybe tenants, about what's being done in the buildings to make sure that we are covering and protecting their health and well-being, that, we are taking extra steps with cleaning, with, the cleaning choices, with processes, and even with signage, right, to make sure that we're maintaining social distancing, and also documenting procedures so that we can do things consistently and make sure that we're continuously improving. So that's not necessarily just a sustainability perspective, but those are aspects of sustainability that are really, I think, probably at the top of mind for everybody right now.
Yeah. Tom, do you have some questions coming in? Sorry, just a moment.
We have not received any questions yet, but anybody can please feel free to type them into the chat box, and we will direct them accordingly, or give you the option to unmute yourself and ask the question directly. Sort of, Jenna, to your point about reimagining the new workplace, what sort of things we can be expecting. I was wondering if you could touch on what we can expect from telecommuting, and potentially how buildings will be functioning in the light of implementation of telecommuting policies for tenants at JLL, but all sort of businesses.
Sure. I mean, a lot of it's going to tie into some of those smart building elements that, you know, I know a lot of our clients are looking at. I think before COVID, you know, we looked at how are we utilizing the space? You know, are people comfortable? Are we providing the right mix of, you know, focus time versus collaboration time? And do you have spaces that are appropriate for that? Now, I think what we're looking at is, again, how do we communicate with our employees so that, you know, we're utilizing this space safely versus, you know, effectively, right? We're trying to maximize the most square footage as we can prior to COVID. Now we're looking at how do we make sure that we are maintaining the buildings in a way that make the employees comfortable more from a health perspective. So I think that occupancy sensors, making sure that there are touch-free ways of using, you know, building amenities, right? So there are a lot of voice controls that I see coming in, a lot of wayfinding apps that are becoming more prevalent. What if you're looking for a conference room and you realize, hey, wait a minute, I used to be able to sit in this conference room because it held 10, and now that I've got 10 people, yeah, I might actually need a conference room that holds almost 30, right? So there's a lot of just process and the way we think about things that have to change. But then as those considerations change, how do we address them with our operations? And so, Tom, I think a lot of it is going to be tied to utilizing building systems, utilizing some of the smart infrastructure and retrofits that we can put in place. And I know that one of the things we wanted to talk about is when's a good time to implement some of that. But honestly, I think too, Tim Hurdle is on with us from Graphit. I think that, you know, his perspective might be able to share a little more about some of the specific systems that we're seeing being installed, Tom, and how those are being used, other than just, you know, focusing on that experience, right? How people are interacting with the building.
Yeah, so I'll say this from a previous experience with the smart building technologies and all the sensors available. You know, as a previous sustainability manager, yeah, they were great projects to push because just insights to how the building's being operated and what we can do to operate it more efficiently. Plus, it gave all these user experience add-ons, which Jen really just talked about, and it still does. So, I mean, if you have some of these systems, the same still holds true. So it's kind of one of those things where not a lot has changed, but it has. I mean, the same opportunities exist. It's really realizing it's there and then, you know, mining that data for what you can get out of it. I will say this in particular, like occupancy data and sensor data that would come from that. I mean, that definitely in what we do, which we could talk to a little bit later, as far as energy data mining, is definitely useful inputs. You know, you don't know what's there until you take a look at it, and you're paying for it, so you might as well use it.
Yeah, if I can chime in, one of the things that we've noticed with a lot of our clients that have already installed sensors is how that sensor technology can be used to update kind of real time the operation of the building. As we take a look at the cleanliness requirements and them increasing, you know, if there's sections of your building that's getting a lot of foot traffic, right, that's the area that needs to be focused from a cleanliness standpoint. And the other thing that some of our clients are utilizing the sensors for is actually a Wall Street Journal article just, I think, last week that was about companies basically policing their workforce with how close they were standing with the infrared sensors that they installed, and and then sending out notes to, hey, when you guys are in the cafeteria, you're getting too close, or when you guys are in this area of maybe the lobby or around an elevator, you're getting too close. So actually, like real time policing their workforce. So the sensor technology is really good as we try to come back into the workplace and start to have an understanding of how we can help our people stay safe.
Yeah, and this is Cindy. What I'll add to this is just thinking about working from home for so many people. A lot of companies' policies didn't allow for that. And now this has proven, hey, we probably can do this pretty well, but how long can we sustain it? How long will people tolerate it? When we do come into the office and when offices open back up, it's a matter of they're going to be there very purposefully to meet face-to-face with other people. So as Jenna mentioned, those room sizes and restricting how many people can meet, that's really important from an operational standpoint of, phasing in the workforce, allowing so many people at a time. And quite frankly, all that I've seen is those office workers, those knowledge workers, they're going to be at the tail end of this, return to the workplace. So they've been working from home. They will probably continue to do that and have organizations determine who's most important to have back in the office and why. And those intergroup interactions, collaborations, those are going to drive the need to come back to the office. So the building being there and in what capacity, what number of occupants is going to be critical.
All great information. And so we've touched on, all of you touched on the idea of maybe what our new environment is going to look like to different degrees, how we're going to monitor safety and workforce activity in this changing environment. But speaking to the nuts and bolts task of actually reopening these spaces physically, what do we anticipate are going to be the risks that property owners and operators and managers expect to see when reopening? And I'll start with Jenna. Would you mind tackling that question?
Oh, you gave me a hard one, Tom. There are a lot of risks, and I don't want to harp on the negatives, so I'm going to start with those so we can end with some of the less negative elements. But a big aspect that property managers and building owners need to be mindful of now is concerns around security. There have been news stories where people are disgruntled about whether or not to wear masks, right? Refuse to make a statement about that, but each state, each city even is kind of deciding, based upon the impact to their area, how and when to reopen and how to phase that. Because it's not consistent, gosh, there are a lot of people that are confused, that are frustrated. And so security has been a really big topic, because as we are trying to change people's behavior, are we requiring masks to enter the building? Are we requiring gloves? Is there hand sanitizer around? Are we directing traffic flow a little bit differently, right? Security plays a big part of that. But also the communications and the change management to it, right? Because if we want people to change their behaviors, we have to very clearly communicate what the expectations are. But the other element to what you're asking me, and I've kind of tap danced around it, is the sustainability issue. And really, what I think it's important to share with our participants today is that everything that I'm seeing is that the environmental social governance topics or sustainability topics, right? They're not losing momentum. A lot of companies have made a very strong stance in, their sustainability position, whether their priority is, environmental sustainability and they want to reduce their carbon footprint, or they want to make sure that, in their maybe manufacturing processes that they are not, putting effluents in the water, right? We want to make sure that we are using water wisely and that we're not polluting it. So there could be a lot of different outcomes and priorities within companies, but I think the important thing to see is that they're realizing the need to balance what they were doing for the planet with what they're doing for people. it's not siloed, right? We are interdependent in the sustainability perspective, because we need the planet needs us to behave. So, when it comes to buildings, I think there's still going to be a huge focus on conserving energy, on utilizing resources. Some of the things I know that we're going to talk about are about that water conservation and about the waste being generated with all the new cleaning that we're involved in. And I think, again, companies are being very mindful of that. So depending upon where, a building is located and what the legislation is in that area, I know we're talking about Cincinnati, but I know there are some others on, we need to be mindful of how COVID is changing regulatory requirements and what those regulatory requirements are going to mean for building owners, because there may be a lot more reporting and transparency required from governments because of what's happened with COVID, right? Are we tracking that waste? Are we cleaning correctly? Do we have policies in place to make sure that we are managing health and wellness of the people that are coming into the buildings we own and manage? And I think it's all interdependent, right? So as long as we are viewing things holistically and trying to kind of take a holistic approach, balancing people, planet, and profit, right? That's what we're all about. And I don't see that changing at all.
Yeah, to add to that, as we've been meeting with several of our clients, a lot of the conversation is focused on that health and wellness, and the well building type standards or the Fitwel standards that are out there, which a lot of those have to do with internal air quality or VOCs or type of materials that are utilized within the building, active design principles like proper circulation. Communicating stairwells, which if you think of it through the lens of how can I keep my people spread out, how can I not coop my people up in an office that's going to be spreading a disease, all of those well building standards basically go hand in hand with those. But as we start to evaluate our buildings based off of how they line up with this health and wellness mission, we got to, make sure we take the opportunity to keep the sustainability, the energy reduction, the water reduction at the same time, right? If we're updating and modifying our HVAC system to align with better ventilation rates, then is that also an opportunity to look at economizers? There's different things that can happen if you keep your both eyes wide open and, not forget about long-term sustainability goals as we look at these kind of quick approaches to aligning with IAQ requirements or material requirements. So I think it's a great opportunity that we haven't had in a long time, with a lot of building owners really taking a time to evaluate based off of health and wellness. We just need to make sure that it's a broader conversation about the overall sustainability initiatives, not just strictly focused on health and wellness.
Yeah, I'll opine on that too. They're definitely all interrelated. So the thing that comes to my mind is you can't manage what you can't measure. So as we're talking about going back into the workplace and kind of take it from a OSHA framework standpoint, you've got administrative controls and engineering controls. A lot of the things that are changing with people coming back into the workplace are administrative controls, and a lot of thought and effort's been put into that by really smart people of how to do this right. So as the building operators are letting people back in, they're going to be watching that and keeping an eye on that to make sure those are working and keeping people apart. Similarly, I mean, we can still see that with like data mining techniques and looking at building energy data as well. I mean, basically a lot of what we do is we look for patterns. So for instance, if I'm looking at energy data, there should be, if we're talking an office building, like a weekday pattern, a weekend pattern, maybe a holiday pattern. Now that we've maybe did some changes to the MEP systems with people coming back in, it's important to look at that data and see if you are seeing patterns. And if there's not, that's an indication of most likely a building that's out of control, which may mean you may not have the engineering controls or the airflow or whatever intended change you wanted to try and keep people safe. You may not be achieving that. And then at the same time, you're almost always going to be wasting energy. I think of for a long time, if you had hot cold calls and a building engineer would go out, what's the temperature, what's the relative humidity, what's the CO2? Those are all indications of, is the airflow working properly? again, I'll go to say all the rules stay the same. And right now is a really important time to not just ignore that energy data, to use it, one, to help drive your energy conservation program, but also to look to see if you might be causing other issues that could impact health and well-being. You know, the best laid plans and good designs are great, but you got to execute properly. And then really the only way to confirm if you're executing properly is to collect that data and look at it and use it.
Cindy, are you seeing changes within the workplace or all of the office buildings in terms of whether they're lightly used or not, or heavily used at this point, and different changes to the operations?
Yeah, absolutely, Elizabeth. From the standpoint of working with our clients to understand the phase-in of people, and at each one of those stages, doing things that Tim and Jen are talking about, looking at how many people are going to be there, what's the airflow we need for our client that has laboratories, or if it's just an office building, making sure that all of those are in place for each stage, because they bring back more and more people. Different parts of the building are going to be phased in to the operations. So it's everything from those airflows and occupancies to what are the cleaning protocols for each space. And we, have more cleaners, more places that we're cleaning on a daily basis. And actually that's a big part of how we bring people back is, do we have enough people to clean the spaces every day, multiple times a day, as we increase that occupancy? So there's many factors that go into deciding how to roll people back in. It doesn't just just flip the lights on one day and say, okay, everybody come back. So there's lots of considerations that go into that that have to be part of the plan.
Daniel, I'm curious as to, we've talked about sort of the reopening, and we've talked about the different protocols that need to be developed. We touched on cleaning, we touched on potentially pumping in more indoor air, but all of these new protocols are going to require education and training. And sort of, Sydney, please feel free to chime in on this as well. How do you view the role of that? How is that supposed to be implemented? And can you touch on maybe how important it is to coordinate that training with both facilities and operations professionals, along with the tenants, and then maybe the corporate leadership of different organizations that might be occupying a building?
Yeah, sure. I think the one thing to start that conversation is that, the vast majority of our clients that we've talked to, are not making massive workplace changes in preparation for their team members coming back. What they are doing are making, intelligent tweaks to the workplace, and then everything else is more of an operational fix. So what we've been supporting a lot of our clients with is proper sign. So signing about, where you're supposed to walk, where you're allowed to walk. Circulation is really important. We have, in some locations, increases with the around each other. Say taking workstations so you can keep a larger circulation around, but circulation is really important. And then the other thing that we've been doing with the workplace is actually reducing the number of touch points. I think Jenna mentioned that, are all the water fixtures touchless water fixtures? Can you put foot openers on the doors or take the doors off? So, those are kind of the tweaks of the workplace. But then the biggest thing is, teaching your team members kind of the new rules of working within an office building, with kind of the health and wellness and the cleanliness as kind of a top of mind. So there's a lot of clients that are making basically a welcome kit packet. And that welcome kit has maybe the 10 rules of the office, their own individual Clorox wipe container, and their face mask for the day. So those rules typically focus on clean desk policies. So every desk, regardless if it's an assigned desk or if it's it's a mobile desk situation. When you leave for the day, your tabletop's clean. And the other thing that's a focus on is basically treating the office like a fitness center. So if you've ever been to the gym, when you go to the gym, most likely before you use a piece of equipment, you're going to wipe it down real quick, right? And then you're going to sit down and do your activity. And there's always a sign on the wall: put your dumbbells back when you're done with them. Don't leave them laying out on the ground. And then there's a sign that says wipe down the bench once you're done with it. So basically keeping that kind of fitness center policy of, I put my stuff back, I don't leave anything laying out, I wipe it down when I sit down, I wipe it down when I leave. And a lot of we see that happening a lot all across the board. So kind of taking that cleanliness responsibility and not just say, oh, well, there's a cleaning crew that's going to show up in a few hours and they're going to make everything clean. Well, no, it's your personal responsibility to, whether it's, a mask policy or cleaning up your own space or wiping down your own space. So trying to make it, we're all in this together. We're all cleaning this together. We're all preventing the spread together. So that the kind of togetherness and personal responsibility is very common that we're seeing right now with a lot of our clients.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. There's two components around changes that I didn't think something like COVID would drive. Eliminating cups in all of our break areas, for a client, because they want people to bring their own and take it with them and not leave it around. Okay, that's a huge hurdle, but sustainability wise, that's great. It's going to help us. And we have to balance and get those kind of wins, because other things like increased water usage from hand washing and cleaning and things like that will, tip the scale the other way. So we have to take those kind of things as little wins and help balance things out. But I think also, in addition to what Daniel was saying, the communication and the welcome gift and just that messaging around what to expect when you come back. Also something that before we may not ever have thought of asking people to clean their own, whatever, desk, chair, seat at the conference room table. But now, because of this pandemic, people are going to want to do that. And okay, for how long? And we can kind of leverage that to a point, but that may not last far into the future once we're well past the pandemic. So communicating to people about expectations for mask wearing or cleaning kind of their own space and being more mindful of what they're using and what they're touching in the facility. So we're going to see that for some time here going forward.
And can I take an unfair advantage and hop in line and ask a question of Cindy and Jenna? Particularly curious of, one that's near and dear to my heart is waste. Previously I was at a place where we tried to push centralized waste, and then like Daniel had mentioned with the personal responsibility, while we're all at it, we should also take the personal responsibility to sort our trash while we're in the office and throw it in the appropriate bin. Now, if you're already removing cups and making people bring their own, was it BYOC policy, I guess? Have you made any changes on the waste side as well, as far as recycling bins or centralized stations or anything like that? Is anything coming to help keep our landfill from filling up with even more one-time use disposable paper or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen that one yet, Tim, at least from the client accounts that I've talked with, just because there aren't people in the space yet. And we've been operating with very minimal, kind of essential staff only. So we haven't seen any impacts on that trash, but that's why the cup thing was such a big deal. Is, well, we can eliminate that, because we know we're going to be using a lot more paper towels for cleaning and for hand washing. So, but yeah, that's if someone's not using a central trash system, this would definitely be a good time to do that. Eliminating touch points and things like that, not just for the people, but for the cleaners, touching every, trash bin in the place versus the central one. This would definitely be an ideal time to do that.
And Tim, I'll go ahead and take advantage since you threw my name out there, but obviously Cindy's right. We don't have a lot of our clients, moving in, or certainly not full force, but there are a couple of benefits and opportunities I think our clients could take advantage of. And I wanted to raise it simply because we're here on a 2030 district call, right? One of the best opportunities to drive change, to support that communication that we're talking about, and as Cindy pointed out, to make it self-sustaining, right? How long can we actually make a behavioral change last? As the parent of a teenager, I have doubts some days. Tim's kids haven't hit that age yet, so he's still optimistic, but I know it's hard. You can remind a teenager multiple times and they belong to you, and so they have to listen, or at least they have to keep their mouth shut, right? Adults aren't like that. We're going into someone's workplace and we're trying to drive change that is tied to a health and wellness benefit, but at the same time, we're asking people to do things very differently. So when we talk about communication, the thing that I would emphasize the most is there has to be a personal benefit, guys. We can't go out there and talk to our employees or talk to people that are just visiting our buildings and say, we're going to dictate how you do things in our space. It's not always very well received. And we've actually had clients, when we were specifically talking about waste, say to us, well, we don't want to put up a lot of posters, or, we don't like to send out a lot of emails because people are busy and they feel that all of this communication is intrusive. Guess what? That's going to be a huge change, because, no longer can we rely on little quarter-sized, medallions that we stick on a trash can and think that that's going to be enough to tell people how to separate that waste, right? There are questions being raised around, can we still compost during COVID? How is this impacting, the infrastructure in our cities? So my best guidance when we talk to clients is to leverage community organizations like a 2030 district, like a Green Building Council. Look at what your city, where your headquarters office is located. Look at what their sustainability plan is, and how can you leverage a partnership with that community so that you are both driving action consistently, right? Obviously, if you're working with your local municipality, you're much more likely to be compliant with any local regulations. So compliance is a big deal, and being able to tell a good story about it, right? Because no longer, I don't think going forward, are companies going to be able to just, put out a little blurb, a little message and say, hey, this is what we did, and we think it's great. I think employees, visitors, vendors, investors, right, are going to be looking at companies and saying, what are you doing in your space and how are you measuring that? So, Tim made a great point. You can't measure what you're not, or you can't manage what you're not measuring. So if you're not measuring right now how your employees are adopting new policies, how participatory your employees or building occupants are in your recycling program, do they even know, how it works? That kind of thing is going to be much more important, I think, to companies going forward. And so with all that pressure, that community engagement and leveraging partnerships in order to be successful is, I think, going to become much more critical to companies. Collaboration is going to be really how they make or break success when they're trying to achieve their goals.
So thanks for those great responses, and and in those answers you touched on maybe the hardest element, we maybe the behavior change component to it, but then also the enforcement side of this new workspace where social distance will be mandated. I was wondering if, Daniel, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering if you could touch on maybe what you're sort of anticipating, maybe building it out further on the emergence and implementations of new technologies. And then maybe Tim can comment a little bit further about, what kind of impacts that might have in terms of the energy profiles and use patterns in these buildings.
Yeah, as we were talking earlier, I think as companies move back into their workplaces, it's going to be important to know, where people are in the building, how often they're in that place within the building, and, if they're following the rules, so to speak, right? If a conference room that used to be for 10 people is now for 5 people, and you're still putting 10 people in there, Like, come on, you guys aren't, following the new guidelines. So, as we move back into those workplaces, that's occupancy sensor technology is going to become more and more important. And to kind of, the lob the softball to Tim, as we are installing occupancy sensors, the vast majority of those sensors have multiple purposes, right? Whether it's measuring temperature, humidity, CO2. CO2 is going to become more important, right? It's a great way to measure the ventilation within the space. So as we have a requirement to up the ventilation for maybe ASHRAE minimums of 20 CFM per square foot, maybe up to 40, which there's a lot of health benefits out there, doubling from ASHRAE minimums. You don't need to do that across your entire building. You need to do that where the people are, right? So if you're combining your occupancy sensor data with CO2 data, you're able to increase and decrease the ventilation, of your HVAC systems to, even though where the people are, you're increasing the ventilation, but maybe overall you're having a much bigger impact on your energy, reducing it because you've dropped the ventilation in an area of your buildings that, are not being occupied on a normal day-to-day basis. Tim, you want to add on that?
Yeah, but first a disclaimer before I speak. In our business, we're more focused on letting data drive us everywhere. So we don't generally talk solutions first. It's all about us analyzing the data and seeing what opportunities exist. And then we generally develop solutions with the client from there so they can have a strategic energy plan moving forward. So that being said, just a few things I will say about the technologies that are being thrown out there. Been doing with the ASHRAE journal I received in the mail last week, for instance. But when we're talking ventilation, it's very important that everybody realizes you don't speed the fan up, you're just letting more outdoor air inside the building because you're trying to dilute it. But it's also very much worth noting that even OSHA and the CDC says this, that it's more so about personal hygiene and spacing. The HVAC really has little to no impact. I'm not a researcher on this topic. I'm just saying what I read. All right. So don't throw stones at me, but I would encourage everybody to consider that before you take these steps, and also consider that particularly as we move into summertime, if somebody, I know there has been much postulation on the 40 CFM per square foot change, is that, are your systems capable of handling that? And these are all things that really, definitely should be considered. Just the same with increasing filtration, right? That might be a very good way. For instance, if you read the CDC guidelines on, I forget the exact acronym of the rooms, but it's where they put infectious people. The air change rates are kind of high, but not that much higher than laboratories. So for instance, there's some companies in town that run R&D labs. They're basically running the same air change rate, but it's more about keeping pressures and HEPA filters and UV disinfection on return streams. So there are ways to get good clean air without really jacking up, bringing in the outdoor air, more of it, because generally you have to run your fan faster. That's more energy, and then when it gets hot, you got to cool the air down, and then we make it so cold to dry it out, you got to heat it back up. So there's opportunities out there, and then that's why we would advocate now that it's really a good time to look at a full-scale energy assessment, so you can see where your energy is going in the building, who's using it, how is it being used, and then use the opportunity to lay out a strategic energy plan. So if you're getting to the point where you're thinking you may need to replace equipment anyway because you want to make these changes, so those kind of things can be factored into the planning and the modeling, and then also gives you time to look for other opportunities to help offset that. So that those of you that own buildings in the district or are hopefully going to join the district can meet this 50% goal, but still meet all your other goals as well.
Hey, Tim, can I tag on to that? And Daniel knows how I love to push an agenda. So one of the things that I did look up about Cincinnati is that they've got a fantastic sustainability plan. It came out in 2018, and it tied not just into businesses, it tied into the residents, right? Because everybody listening, to this call that has, their company, they're in the Cincinnati area, guess what? That's where your employees come from. So when we're talking about, energy efficiency, and we're talking, Cindy, about maybe what is happening with some of the employees that come into the buildings you manage, or Daniel, even, the folks coming into the spaces that you design, right? Is that if we're not explaining to the people that are coming into our spaces, hey, this is what's being done, this is why it's good for you, but on top of that, here's what you can do at home. That's what makes it personal. I mean, we have a lot of information that we are trying to share with people. And I think if I remember my college class on advertising, Dr. Rob said you got to say it 7 times for anybody to remember it. Well, now look at how much information we are all competing against out there. Some of it even contradicts each other. So the best thing, again, that we've been trying to promote is, understand what's happening in your community, understand where the benefits are for your employees from a resident perspective, and how can you tell that story about what is being done in this commercial space, so that people also know what kinds of changes that they can apply at home, right? That's the best way to get them to remember those changed behaviors, is if there's a personal benefit and it's something that they can duplicate, in their off time. If it's only at the office, well, we might be a little less inclined to remember it. But if it's every day, no matter where we go, that makes a lot more sense. And that's where we're really driving that change, and making sure that everybody is maybe focused on similar priorities, or at least heading in the same direction. Certainly from a community perspective, I think Cincinnati's got some great opportunities for alignment.
Thanks for that comment, Jenna. And yes, indeed, the 2030 district was a direct product of the 2018 Green Cincinnati plan. So, we're certainly organizationally a manifestation of how you can implement policy and planning and execute on it practically, and try to operationalize it. And so that's our role. And we're fortunate to be able to have those guidelines from our leaders at the municipal level, but also extends across the business, nonprofit, and private communities. We have about 15 minutes left for questions, which has been silent so far. So if there's any people on the call that would like to ask an explicit question to one of our members, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself or type the question in the chat box. And I'd be happy to read it out. And if not, I will prompt another question as needed.
You've got some great community leaders in your participant screen there, Tom. It's too bad that it's not polite to shout out to folks and say, hey, what are you doing?
No, we certainly appreciate that. It's not always easy to step up even when you're talking online. One question that I do have come up is that we do have a lot of different organizational profiles in the 2030 district, different member types and different types of buildings. We haven't touched on too explicitly what are some of the nuances between the different buildings in terms of how a manufacturing facility versus a commercial office building versus a hospital system might be shifting their how they reopen. And I'm curious as to see what types of businesses we're noticing that are opening up first on the commercial side, and whether or not there's specific management considerations that will have to be considered as we sort of roll out these different types of buildings. And, I know JLL manages a huge portfolio of different types of buildings. I'm wondering if Jenna or Sydney could touch on that.
I'll start, Cindy, and just share the fact that obviously retail was one of the first, that we saw opening. And there's a lot of question, right, around what constitutes essential business. But I will say that as soon as the hair salons and the nail salons, and believe it or not, pet groomers started opening, there's a lot of conversation in communities around that. Let's be really clear, JLL doesn't manage a whole lot of pet grooming facilities, right? Because those are usually in small business homes that have been repurposed, even in strip centers. But we do manage quite a few strip centers. And from a retail perspective, you know, there's again a big mix in what people are concerned about and what's driving them to get outside. I think Cindy made a really good point. Most people want to go to the office because they have a specific need, right? They have something that they have to accomplish and it requires collaboration or perhaps a specialized piece of equipment. Retail, I think a lot of people were going out just to get out. A lot of our parks were closed. So right now I'm seeing retail is opening. It is slow. It is anywhere from 25 to 50%. What do they call that? It's not occupancy. Thank you. We can only have 25 to 50% occupancy in those spaces. But it's also creating some interesting innovations, guys. And I'd like to hear what other people are seeing, because I've seen everything from small greenhouses being used over, you know, 2 top tables so that there is social distancing for restaurants and people can sit, you know, outdoors maybe. But I've also seen tables being taken out of spaces. I have seen some really creative use of space as they have maybe moved tables over into what might have been a waiting area in the past, because people aren't coming in to wait, right? You're in your car and you call and say, hey, I'm here, is my table ready? Or I'm here, are you ready, you know, for me to come in for my dental cleaning or for my hair color? And hey, those are big topics, by the way, for people that have been locked at home for, you know, 6 weeks and are worried about, you know, some beards that I've seen getting a little unruly. Not yours, Daniel, you look great. But, you know, these are things that people just want to get out and get done, right? It's a little self-care and it's kind of a stress reliever. But that's really what I'm seeing is just people trying to get out into those retail spaces and all of the retail managers trying to figure out how to be creative and keep people safe and still make it feel welcoming.
Yeah, Jenna, and I think on the other end of the spectrum, talking about manufacturing, Tom, a lot of manufacturing did not close down. It potentially even ramped up during this time, depending on what they're providing. We saw many groups start to produce some of the things like hand sanitizer if they were capable, and, you know, reinventing themselves to meet some of those needs across the country. So what they did in their operations to keep running safely, you know, you've probably seen it. You put the tent outside before employees even come into the building. They're going through screenings. They have, you know, protocols set up for, if you don't feel well, don't come to work, and reinforcing that from, you know, a health and safety perspective. So things like that, keeping those places running, making, you know, anything from hand sanitizer to the drugs that you take when you're sick, or who was the Ford started making some of the equipment the hospitals needed. So they, you know, changed things around to stay working, and just changed how they allowed people to be in the building more safely. And those kind of protocols are what we're seeing in other businesses as well. And, you know, along with the prioritization of who's coming back when is part of that big, you know, return to work. And that's everything from, you know, everything from manufacturing to down to the retail Jenna's talking about, is who do we bring back and why? And businesses are evaluating what's the most critical need for people to be together in the office, and then phasing it in that way.
And it sounds like we got a few questions in the chat inbox that I'll just go ahead and read for time's sake. We got a question from Tim Foster with Siemens about whether or not businesses will start to employ thermal scanning to detect elevated body temperatures. Do we have any sort of use cases that you've seen so far, or maybe some insights into that technology and its relative effectiveness?
I know my Walmart is doing it, Tom. You know, I've seen it deployed, but it's not something that, you know, as a commercial real estate services firm, really, that I've personally been involved in, right? We certainly talk about health and well-being. We certainly talk about, you know, to Cindy's point, some of the new policies that are in place. But as companies, and I think the question is actually how many businesses? That's a good question, really, it is. I don't know how many, but a lot of it has to do with Cindy's perspective. What is their, what is their role, right? I can see a lot of food service places are starting to implement the thermal scans. I know grocery stores were certainly doing that. And even Amazon distribution centers, certainly here in the Indianapolis area, I've seen some anecdotal evidence of that. But as far as companies actually reporting on it, it's not information that I could share with you other than what I've seen quoted in the news. So I'll leave that for anybody else.
I have a thought now. I will say this, since the gentleman with the question was from Siemens, he might be more privy than I to what type of sensors are out there. But in recent work, like within the past year, of like the sensors that we use for lighting, etc., I don't think they're that good that you could actually do that. I mean, we had issues if you put them in the wrong spot, like the diffuser in the ceiling blowing the cool air into the conference room. Like if you put the sensor in the wrong spot, it wouldn't even see people walk in. And I know there just had to be more expensive sensors than what we're using. Even some of the ones where we had one sensor per light fixture, I don't know if they would have that kind of resolution to be able to tell. So I'm also assuming that's what Mr. Foster meant when he was asking about elevated body temperatures, like building installed sensors versus people at the door checking.
Yeah, this is Daniel. So we have had a few of our clients ask about, similar to what they Customs has installed, in some of the airports, but those thermal scanning systems have a pretty big dollar figure associated with them. The ones that, can measure to the 10th of a degree of a human being. The vast majority of our clients, they are checking temperatures as folks come in, but it's with the handheld, forehead scanners. The other thing several of our clients are doing, back to that personal responsibility, they're utilizing existing apps or creating wellness apps that you have to fill out every morning before you show up in the office. Like, how do you feel today? Do you have a cough? Take your own temperature and input it here. And you have to submit that before you drive to work in the morning. But the common thread is whether it's thermal scanning that's automatic, or a forehead scan when you walk in the lobby, or an app that you fill out before you drive to work. The vast majority of companies are taking people's temperatures before they come into the building. So.
We have another question here, and just about 5 minutes left. So the question is, will the 2030 district try to track the carbon savings as a result of the employees working from home and thereby not driving their cars? So, that's an interesting one. It will likely roll out it's one of those things where having a survey at the onset would have been really useful. But there's a lot of tracking of this information done nationally, and it is fascinating. There's some, I think it's Streetlight Tom, correct me if I'm wrong. What is it? Streetlight?
Yeah, that's the name of the data analytics firm. Yeah.
So they've, they're tracking this information and really even able to delve down to a really granular level, like where hot pockets are and why that travel is happening and occurring in different areas, and why there's a spike during a certain time of day. So they can use this data to kind of analyze what's happening. As for the 2030 districts, it's going to be a really great opportunity. I'll say two things. One is that nationally, all of this information will roll into our national data. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that changes over time and what this impact has at a national level. Not every district does do their transportation, and we don't have that really rolled out yet in our district here. So, like I said earlier, it would have been really wonderful to have had that information prior to starting this. But at least for Cincinnati, I think OKI does do some of the measuring, so that information is likely there. And then the other thing I was going to say is that, I think a lot of organizations, from what we hear, so many of them really are finding that this is comfortable for a lot of people, and they didn't really need all of their employees at their workplace. So, I think that there's going to be probably a trend of some portion of the workforce staying at home. And, I'd like to kind of open that up to, the group here. Does anybody want to take that, and offer your insights on what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think, Elizabeth, the perhaps bigger conversation is the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. And if, I'm not aware of any companies that are really trying to track what the CO2 usage is of their work from home employees. Mm-hmm. But if we go from pre-COVID 5 to 10% of the United States workforce being from home to 25, 35%, that's a massive change in the amount of folks that are working from home. And, I think it's an opportunity for companies to take a more holistic view of scope 1, 2, and 3 and have a conversation around, did we really reduce our CO2 30% in our office because our office is half empty and we sold 2 buildings? Is that really, did you really reduce your CO2, or did you just shift it to your personal employee? I actually participated in a Cornet event a couple weeks ago, and the conversation was around companies over the past 10 years have had a big focus on, health and wellness programs where they incentivize people through reduction in their insurance, or, winning an iPad, or, winning prizes with points if they got a yearly physical, or went for runs, or participated in whatever, to promote their own personal health. But, if companies are really serious about their CO2 reduction and recognize that it just shifted to the house, how can they support the same team members to maybe similar programs of reducing the CO2 at their individual location? So I think if we're talking scope 1, 2, and 3, and then having that conversation about reducing CO2, it's how do we support the individual people at their homes and reducing the CO2, or reducing the water, or reducing the waste at their individual home, because that's now their workspace.
Yeah.
And Daniel, I think that's an excellent point. And just, again, kind of mentioning the Cincinnati sustainability plan again, there's a lot of information in there about residents. So think about the fact that if everybody has moved out of the office buildings into their homes, what's that doing for the residential energy consumption in certain areas? What's that doing for certainly cell phone connectivity and internet connectivity, right? Our businesses a lot of times are given, higher, I guess, again, higher speeds, I guess, for transmitting data, certainly higher than what I've gotten at my home. And it shows, right? So the one thing I think that I would just say for everybody to leave with is companies are going to have to really think about how much of my workforce is going to come back into my building, and how do I plan for this new remote workforce, and what can I measure? How can I measure it, and how can I report on it? Because companies that are already reporting, they're aware of this gap, but they've never really felt the pressure that I've seen to address it holistically, like Daniel mentioned, and certainly not report on it. So we have to start thinking about a whole new way of collecting this kind of data. I don't know, Tim, maybe Graphit starts doing residential energy audits as well, but there's a lot of data out there that our clients don't have access to right now. So, to Daniel's point, if they're going to be held accountable for, this shift in where their environmental impact went, is it at somebody's home? Is it in their office, right? Is it split? then, you know, maybe we're going to need folks like Tim to be able to tell us, how do we track that and how do we collect it?
One other part of that question, just to circle back, and maybe Cindy or Daniel could answer this. Are you seeing any businesses, like any shift in the restaurant scene to try to limit, encourage social distancing and limit the exposure? Are you seeing more like, like food trucks, or, or how are different employers handling that?
From what I've seen as far as offerings within, client spaces, if they don't have a, cafeteria where they're offering food today, like the write-in question about, bringing stuff in, actually, I've not seen anybody consider that. More so asking employees, at least for now, just bring your own. They want to just limit that in and out traffic, and even the cafeterias that I see using online apps to place your order so you can just pick it up. The seating areas aren't necessarily open for business yet. So I think we're still in the state of limiting some of that, even though you might personally see restaurants more open, and if you've been in one already, they've got barriers and things up between booths and things like that. We're not retrofitting anything in facilities like that right now. We're more taking the precaution of limit the use, and then we'll see later how much of that's still going to be needed. More so because it's a controlled environment. The employers can pretty much tell their employees how they need to behave in the workplace, where in a restaurant can't really say much to their patrons about how to behave, or they might go someplace else. So it's a different dynamic within the workplace than it is in the restaurants that you go to for dinner on a weekend. So I think there's two different thought processes there for that reason.
Yeah, to build on what Cindy said, we've helped several clients on relaying out their dining space, providing the proper social distancing. But the biggest concern is people standing in lines waiting to get food. So the ordering the night before and everything being grab and go. So you either get a box lunch delivered to your desk, or you go down to what was the servery, now is just a big grab and go line. You grab it and you can sit at a table, but the tables are all spaced apart now. We've actually had one client that's taking out their cafeteria 100%, and in doing so, making just a grab and go station where basically they're going to have the box lunches prepped, and then they're turning what was their server and kitchen space just into more dining space, so they can have the tables more spread out. So that's kind of on the more aggressive side, but in general, a lot of people are doing box lunches. So no food being commingled with the general employee population. It's all prepped. It's all in a box. It's got your name written across the top of it. And you walk up, grab your lunch, and then go sit down. So that's definitely very common right now.
And thank you, Brewster, to the great suggestion here.
Hula hoops are a great idea.
Well, I really appreciate everyone's time today. This has been a really insightful discussion. And we are at time. We're a little bit over. I apologize for that. I do want to point out that Tom did share that link. Thank you, Tom, for getting that link so quickly. He's a lot faster at those things than I am. So we really appreciate you guys. Cindy, Jenna, Daniel, Tim, thank you so much. And please connect with us. Give us a ring, email us, whatever you need. We're here as a resource. So any questions you have, follow up, any resources that you need, please reach out to us. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.